button hit.
Lovely. So yeah, as Jacob said, thanks folks for joining, giving up a bit of your lunchtime for this. Hopefully you will enjoy yourselves for the next hour. And yeah, Jacob and I went to the pub and we decided to do this talk, and we said, well, you know, how many people will come? It's about content design. We were like, yeah, maybe like 10. And I said, well, maybe if we write a really, really, really good title, we might get 12. So yeah, the 50 or so of you here is testament to the great ideas that happen in pubs. Okay, so let's get on with it. Let's talk about why it does take a content designer 2 weeks to ask a simple question. So before we go in, I'd like to just introduce myself. My name is Christine Cawthorne. Hello. The important information about me is on the screen. I like to drink tea. I'm a cat person. I've just accepted that's my personality now. So I don't pretend anymore. That's just who I am. And for work, I do content design, content strategy, and train people how to be more confident writers. So my career started at Yahoo, gives you an indication of my vintage. And then I worked for a few years at the BBC. My best celebrity story is that I once went through a revolving door and I was going out and Adrian Chiles was coming in and we said hi. Well, I said hi and then he said hi. And I thought that I knew him. And then when I came out, I was like, it's Adrian Chiles. So yeah, it doesn't get more celebrity packed than that. And then I started my company Crocstar in 2008. So we help organizations with their content, particularly complex content and complex organizations. So public sector, third sector, education. And about 10 years ago, I worked at Government Digital Service training lots and lots of people how to write for gov.uk. So it was about 2,500 people in the end, which was very good fun. So I show you a slide, and I reckon by now you've got an impression of me. But what if we go at this differently? What if I introduce what if I show you this sort of introduction? There's a lot more text, lots of long words, long sentences. It's a bit stuffy. This would give you a different impression. So also I had to laugh. I came up with the twin realms and I was kind of really happy with like how annoying that sounded. Anyway, I Googled it. I think it's a game. So anyway, I can't claim it, but the twin realms was making me laugh. Okay, but what if we go again? And what if you'd heard of Crocstar and you rang your friend and you said, have you ever heard of Crocstar? And they said, yeah, I know Christine, really nice, knows everything about content, really fun to work with. Yeah, give her a call. I'd just like to point out, it's not a real quote. So that would feel different again. And that's what I want to talk to you about this lunchtime, is that words matter, and the words that you read or the words that you hear about a subject will have a direct impact on how well you understand the subject and how you feel about it. So we're going to look into what content design is, and then we're going to go into the real nitty-gritty of content design. I'll show you one question that I worked on in a project from a few years ago. And then there should be time at the end. There should be plenty of time to have a chat. So I would love to hear questions and kind of thoughts, comments, fears, dreams, wishes, all of that good stuff. So let's talk about what content design is. Actually, I saw the results of the poll. Loads of you will know. Phew. Okay, so content design is the process of writing and presenting information so that people can understand it and do what it is that they need to do. So content design often refers to content on websites, but you can also apply content design techniques to printed material, forms, letters. You might even apply techniques to scripts, for example, as well. So I've got an example that a chap that I worked with a few years ago introduced me to. So that was Professor Trudeau. He's a law professor with a real interest in clear language. And he uses this example, which I'm borrowing today. So this is an example of content design in action. So here's the before version. This is a consent form for a colonoscopy from the US. So what you'll see here is quite a lengthy document. You've got a full page of text to read through. And the way that this works is that the patient who's about to undergo the procedure reads through it all. They sign at the bottom to show that they consent to the procedure. And that's the thing done. So if we look at this from the patient's point of view, they've had the information and they can read through it. And when we look at this from the organization's point of view, we can see that they've made the information available. They've gotten consent from the patient who's signed, and crucially, they know that legally they're covered because they have explained the risks. They know that the person has signed it, but they've got no way of knowing really that whether the person has actually read that information and whether they've understood it. So what we can do with this document is apply content design techniques, and we can get a reworked version. So this is the same form that's been redesigned. Remember, content design seeks to present information so that people can do what it is that they need to do. And so if we think about what the reader of this content needs to do, is they need to understand the risks involved so that they can make an informed choice. There are some quite big stakes here. So the content's been reworked in a couple of different ways. Firstly, how it reads, and then secondly, how the document itself works. So imagine this is two sides of the same piece of paper. So imagine it's printed. So over on the left, I know it's quite small, but you'll have to believe me, the text has been simplified. But you can see, even though it's quite small, you can see that there are headers added in there. Those are those darker grey boxes. So they've got headers, they've got some explanations of medical terms in there. And then on the second side, so side A on the left is the information, side B on the right, that's the consent. And the consent is given in two parts. So the left-hand side of that second page is a series of statements, and what the patient does is they sign each statement to show that they agree or that they understand. Then they give the form to the medical professional. The medical professional asks them a series of questions and writes down their answer. So hopefully you can see there's a couple of lines ready for blank lines ready for the professional to write in what the patient says. So now we can see that the way that this document works is that the burden of consent and understanding has been shared. We've got it both across the patient and the medical professional. And I think this is just a really lovely example of content design in action. So thanks, Prof. Trudeau. So content design also involves making language decisions based on insights and data. So that's what we just saw was an example of how changing the words can improve content for both the reader reading it and the organisation dispensing it. And content design also incorporates making decisions based on things that we can find out. So it can be a different way of doing things. So I want to show you an example based on Google Trends. If you've not used Google Trends before, it's a tool that shows you how often a particular search term is Googled, so relative to total search volume over a period of time. So what you can do is use it to compare words to see how often they're searched for compared to each other. So I want to show you an example. It's from gov.uk a few years ago. So GDS, former colleagues, you may recognise this one. So there's a benefit that you can get that if your partner dies, and it used to be called the widow's pension. It's one of the oldest parts of the social security system, going back to about 1925, which is why it's called Widow's Pension, because it was mainly for wives, not husbands in those days, but mini feminist lecture over. It's not been called Widow's Pension for a long time. The name changed to bereavement allowance around about 2001. So this screenshot is from Google Trends between April 2021 and April 2022, so across a year. You can see that, so what I've done is I've searched for widow's pension, that's the blue line, and which is the higher line, and bereavement allowance, which is the red line, which is the line below. So from this first graph, you can see that searches in the UK for widow's pension was much higher than searches for bereavement allowance. So this is quite interesting in and itself. You can see that the difference between the number of searches is huge. But we can also extend that date range to since Google began, so since about 2004. And you can see that the difference between those search volumes actually increases over time rather than decreases. So you would have thought that with the name change, eventually the new name would be more searched for than the old one, but that obviously hasn't happened here. So what the content designers on gov.uk decided to do was they decided to use both terms in the title, in the heading. So meaning we're not leaving anyone behind, educating people as they visit the content. So if you think about your organization and the different teams and the access to the different data that those different teams might have, your marketing team might see what people are clicking in newsletters, social media, your customer support team might be seeing what people are calling or emailing about. So that can give us insights into language. So content designers are able to use those insights to help create change or even pull together content on the site so that it's more helpful to people. And content design means having an idea of how much your audience knows about a topic. So I'm going to ask you to imagine something now. It's food related, which is perfect because it's lunchtime. So imagine your friend comes round and they've brought you a cheesecake. Yes, lovely. But it's quite a hot day and the cheesecake's looking a little bit wobbly. So you say, why don't you pop that in the fridge for a bit? We'll have it when it's firmed up again. Just imagine they say, oh, what's a fridge? And you're like, what? How do you not know what a fridge is? So you might say something initially like, it's sort of a cupboard and it's cold and it keeps your food fresh. And they're like, wow, how does it work? And you think, oh, God, how does a fridge actually work? I know that I plug it in, I know that I turn it on, but unless you actually know the science behind how a fridge actually works, it would be really difficult to explain. You can't just sort of put some random words together. You can't make assumptions. You need to know how each part works separately as a whole and then how they work together to be able to explain how a fridge actually works. Luckily for your friend, turns out you are a real boff and you do know how a fridge works. So you're able to use your content design skills to explain in simple language something that is actually quite complex. Would anyone like to know how a fridge actually works? Now that we're here? Yes. Okay, good, because I've prepared the slide. So we already know that our friend knows nothing about fridges. So we're going to start off with a few basic principles. So we start off with, if you compress, which means to squeeze, if you squeeze a gas, it becomes hotter. And then if you allow a gas to expand, it cools down. So our two main principles here. You also need to know that heat always moves from hot to cold. I feel like Tom's writing notes and it's just giving me joy. Okay, so, and we get the explanation. So refrigerant, which let's explain because we've not come across this term before, is a working fluid. It goes from a liquid to a gas and back again. So refrigerant moves along a small pipe, which is outside the back of the fridge. It comes inside the fridge and the pipe expands, allowing the refrigerant to expand into a gas and therefore cool down. So what that does is that cools the air in the fridge, which circulates, keeps your food fresh, crucially keeps your cheesecake nice and firm. And then what happens is the refrigerant is then pushed into the smaller pipe where it goes back outside the fridge and it heats up again. So it goes hot, cold, hot, cold. A couple of other parts to it, but essentially that is how a fridge works. By the way, I had to look at all of this information to get to that 2-paragraph explanation. The writing of this talk has been very educational in terms of my fridge knowledge. So content designers do the words. That's kind of our joke. We're always doing the words. But in order to do the words, you need to also have the understanding. So that's what content design is, and that's what content designers are doing. We're bringing together understanding about the users, about their mental models and how they understand language, as well as the understanding of the topic. So let us take our newfound fridge knowledge into the next section and look at a peek into a project. So this is about deciding how to phrase a question. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about one question that came up in a project that I worked on. So I'll just tell you a bit about the project for some context. The project was about people on probation. Those people were about to go on training. Those people on probation go on training courses to develop new skills to help stop their offending. So what the training aims to do is to change the thinking, the attitudes and the behaviours which may lead people to reoffend. Ultimately, the training is designed to help people stay out of prison. So that's the context in which we are working. And part of that project was designing a service for the people delivering the training, so for them to give feedback about attendees to their probation officers. So to give feedback in this service, they answer a series of 7 questions. Some of those questions include, did they attend the session? Are there any safeguarding issues? Are they meeting their desired outcomes? So we've had a few questions already. We're going to look at question number 6. This, by the way, is a diagram of how the prison and probation service works. It's incredibly detailed, and that in itself takes quite a long time to get your head around. So hopefully I've given you enough context. So we're going to look at question number 6. So we come to our question on iteration number 1. So question 6 was originally phrased like this: was Matt, and so imagine Matt is the person on probation going to the training. It's just a dummy name. This is not any real data. Was Matt engaged in this session? Then you can see that there are 2 options. It's yes or no. There's also a little bit of hint text there, which is, for example, consider how well engaged they were and what their body language was like. So you select your option, then underneath there is a box, a free text box, where you can add information about their engagement in this session. So what the probation officer needs to know from this question is the person doing okay? Are they taking things in? Did they seem like themselves? Those sorts of questions. So rehabilitation is quite complicated. People can need different levels of support depending on what's going on for them. So maybe sometimes they seem distracted, maybe they are not interested, or something else seems to be happening. And what that means is that could be an indication that not all is well. So remembering that the point of these training programs is to stop people reoffending. So this question could give an early indication as to whether something like that might be on the cards. So although it's just one question, the longer term outcome could eventually be quite life-changing. So because this question was so important, we decided to test it with real users. So that would be the training providers, probation officers, until it worked. And I'm going to say worked in sort of speech marks. So the problem with this question as is that the word engaged is unclear. So did Matt get engaged to be married in this session? Obviously, that's quite unlikely, but the word doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. So it can also mean busy, it can mean occupied, it can mean employed, it can mean reserved in advance. It can also mean entering into combat, as well as, in this instance, obviously, the meaning is closer towards participating or being involved. So the range of answers that you could get from this question is quite broad, and there's scope for confusion here. Engaged isn't working quite hard enough. I forgot that I'd done that. So as content designers, we iterate content. So we write new versions of content, and we do that loads. That's kind of part of what it is to be a content designer. So we're changing content in response to information and research so that we can improve it. So this happens when we get more information, maybe we're speaking to more people in the organization, we're doing user research or testing the content, we're looking at analytics. Maybe sometimes we change our mind about something, you know, sometimes you just go off a word and you're like, no, I don't want to use that actually. Sometimes the design changes, or sometimes you talk to a developer and the way that the service is changing, the way that it works is changing. So we need to think about that when we're changing our content. So what words might or might not work? What content are we going to test? How are we going to test it? How much time do we have available? Because we're always working in a way where we haven't quite got enough time. So what can we do in the constraints that we've got? And what's the outcome that we need for this content? What does it need to do? Also, how do we know when we get to an iteration that's good enough? That can be a question to consider before, during, after the creation. The other thing I want to talk about is using a content pattern, as we looked at before. So we know that we're going to change this question. And one thing that comes up, particularly if you're doing something like writing 7 questions in a row, is that you might use a content pattern. So I've borrowed from Lizzie Bruce this definition. So Lizzie is a content designer and a strategist. So she says content patterns are blueprints made of words. Quite like that explanation. So what content patterns do is that they make sure that your content is consistent, which helps with readability and trust from your users. What we're doing here is we're asking a set of questions in the same way, so people don't have to use quite as much brain power as they can anticipate the format of the question. So here we've got a pattern where the questions have a yes/no answer and then room to add information. So we go at this question again. Remember, the previous one was Matt engaged in the session? And here we go with, what was Matt's behavior like in this session? Then, to keep the pattern, you can't say yes, no. So we've got a version that is acceptable or concerning. Obviously, it's immediately problematic with those 2 choices. So participants didn't like this version. The 2 choices are way too stark. Behavior is not either acceptable or concerning. Actually, maybe I should check my report cards from school. So there's no room for nuance here in that binary choice. So I knew that I would have to change it again, but I figured I would need much more information, loads more than I currently had here. So there is a really, really good way to get a lot of information really quickly. And it's about using the wrong words tactically. So writing a deliberately bad or wrong question means that we can learn more than just someone doesn't like the phrasing. So if something's very obviously wrong, it can create an opportunity for people to tell us what and how it's wrong, how it needs to be or how it could be fixed. It gives people the space to talk about what they think things should be like and why. It gives us, the writers, a glimpse into how those people see the world, so what they value, gives us a chance to hear the language that they use and the word choices that they make. So asking why it's wrong gives people basically the floor to talk, and also helps us see maybe they've got some underlying assumptions or mental models, a lot of these people using this service in particular were professional users. So they've got a similar set of reference points, not exactly the same. So this was quite an interesting ploy that we did. So here's the question, and it's, do you need to report poor behaviour in this session? So the people that we tested with, MOJ, didn't like this question because of that negative framing. Remember, this question is never going to stay as it is here. I knew the wording was going to change after this. I planned it in time-wise, so I had enough time to do this test. What comes out of this question is that we get access to a lot of research that shows that people who've been in prison are stigmatized when they're released. They often face barriers in society because of the negative perception of them. So phrasing this question in this way helps us to learn also about that, but also that this question is not just about seeing and reporting poor behaviour, but also about giving space to note what's happened in sessions, what progress is made. And what training providers talked about was telling a story of how a person gets from where they've started to where they've finished. And the probation officers talk about needing to see that sort of information as well. So this question's iteration is a tactical move. It's about learning as much as possible, as quickly as possible. It's not about trying to get it right. It's a bit like playing Wordle. You've only got a couple of options left. You've got to do an adieu in there to know which vowels to go with. So once we learn from this iteration, we know we could go again. What you're seeing in these iterations is a series of content tests. So we're showing real people the content in the design to see if it works. And most user research focuses on task completion. Does the design help the users to complete the task? But for content testing, we're normally focusing more on how much people understand of the information. What we can also test for is things like tone of voice, or how people feel during or after using the service. So I knew that after asking the wrong question, I'd be able to write a better question because I'd have more information. And what I learned was that that question would need to be much more neutral, so that we weren't leading people to fill in only one type of answer. Yes, they were engaged, or yes, they showed poor behaviour. The other things that we think about when designing that test are, how are we going to analyse what we learn? Do we know what the next test will be, how we will check? And have we thought about the ethics of the way that we test something? So, iteration 4, it's getting tasty. So this is the next iteration. So what we've got here is describe Matt's behaviour in this session. The hint text here, so you'll notice that we've broken the pattern. We say add information about their behaviour in this session. So we have the free text box initially. So the question is quite neutral. We have the hint text, we have the free text box. We've broken the pattern and we've asked a second question. If you described poor behaviour, do you want to notify the probation practitioner? So do we need to alert someone else straight away? And there we've got the yes, no. So the hint text is a little bit vague here. It might not need to be there at all. But we've understood much better why we're asking this question, which is why we've added a second question. We've still got the yes, no here. From this testing, this question could undoubtedly be improved again. But what we learned here was that this was good enough to move on, because in testing there was much less talk about this question. People kind of filled it in and moved on. And so there's a kind of good enoughness about this. We were developing the service, we had to move on. You know, this is one part of a gigantic service. But what we did here, I think, is quite an emblematic a little microcosm of content design in a whole. There's quite a lot going on here. What's the outcome that we need? What are the mental models that people have? What's the right thing to do? And also you're in the constraints of, do we have enough time for this? So 4 iterations on one question. It's actually squeezed quite a lot out of this part of the design, but it took way longer than 2 weeks. I mean, why does it take 2 weeks? This took ages. And here's why. So we are doing many things. We're understanding the scenario or problem or problems in the first case. What is it that we're trying to do? We're then gathering information about people's mental models, about language preferences. I took out of this talk, but we also did a bunch of work. We did a survey around what people call things, and we got a bunch of respondents about, even what's your job title? And there was something like 7 job titles that were essentially the same job. So even that from the start, we've got lots of variation. We're working out the flow of information. Which order do we say these things in? Then you've actually got to write the content. I mean, that takes some time. And then you've got to make sure that what you've written is consistent with the other content that you see. That's a full-time job sometimes. Then if you're testing the content, which hopefully you have the time and space to do, you need to work out how to test it. Then you've got to rewrite the content, and as we've seen, sometimes a few times. And then crucially, you're checking the outcome of that content. Do people do what it is that we need them to do, or what it is that they need to do? So are the outcome of the words we're using what we're expecting? So that's why it takes 2 weeks to ask a simple question. And obviously my computer is frozen. Let me see if I can try to get to the next slide. This doesn't want to go. Hang on, let me stop and start again. Doo-be-doo. See if it works. Here's why it takes so long. Here we go. So I would love to try and answer any questions or any thoughts, fears, dreams, hopes, etc. that you have about content. And I want to say thanks for spending a few minutes with me here today. It's been very enjoyable gas bagging to you. And yeah, please do connect or pop over to the Crocstar website. I'd love to see you there. Thank you very much. But yeah, let's chat. I've talked to you for ages.
While we're waiting, so the example you gave, the end result that you got to, where you're asking people to describe the behavior, was that actually information being used at all, or was that just for the purpose of being able to get to the yes, no?
So what, one of the iterations or the question in general?
The final iteration that you showed with us.
Oh, yeah. So what we got from there, let me get it back for us. So this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what we had here then was people, they would write in things like, they would say things like, Matt was engaged. So it would be things like, are they on time? Are they, sometimes people lead quite chaotic lives, and sometimes they take this sort of program seriously, and sometimes not necessarily so much because there's other stuff going on. So this box is basically like a catch-all for, are they okay? So, maybe week 1 you don't necessarily know this person that well, but a training course might last 12 weeks. So over that 12 weeks, you might say, oh yeah, they're really growing in confidence. Or it might be, oh, they've had a few issues this week, X, Y, and Z has happened, so they were a bit distracted. But basically anything that you've noticed about that person in that session that is about their well-being, their state of mind, not necessarily are they learning the thing, you know, sometimes yes, but it's kind of more holistic than that. It's bigger than that. So any question that you ask here is, you don't want to be too specific, because anything might be relevant. But if you're too vague, you know, are they engaged? If you're too vague, then, you know, if you're too specific, you only get one type of answer. If you're too vague, you don't really get any answer. So that's really what we're grappling with, the specificity versus the vagueness.
Yeah, cool. Makes sense.
I'll just check that for a sec.
You've got a question in the chat?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me just check. So Catherine, I was wondering if part of testing involves user research with people with access needs. Yeah, so I wasn't really involved in the recruitment on this project, but because we had a couple of user researchers, but yes, we did have people with dyslexia. So they were all professional users. So it was people that worked in the prison probation service. So yeah, we definitely had a few people with dyslexia, and I think we had someone that used like a screen magnifier, if I recall correctly. So there were definitely kind of considerations around clear language, you know, particularly that engaged question, where there are so many possible definitions of that. And even though it's sort of obvious, you know, people who understood that question would go, oh, that's really, you know, it's really obvious. Like we say engaged all the time. It's still not clear enough, I think. And it's also a little bit restricting. You're talking about whether they're into it, not whether there's any extra stuff going on. So, yeah, different access needs can be quite interesting. I've seen in projects, sometimes with a professional audience, there can be sometimes a resistance to trying to recruit people for user research, because, you know, there might be a fairly small number of people that use that service. And so there might be resistance to say, well, we don't have that need, but of course you always have that need. So yeah, does that answer your question? I feel like I've just really rabbited on there. Give me a sign, as Brittany would sing. Okay, I'm going to assume yes. Okay, Uzma, was where there is room for people to interpret things, would you provide examples, or would that be too leading? For example, poor behaviour. Yeah, see, what I wanted to do, sorry, I really just muttered that question. Let me read it out properly. So where there is room for people to interpret things differently, would you provide examples, or would that be too leading? For example, poor behaviour, people's perceptions, thresholds for what is poor behaviour might be different. Yeah, and actually that that example there really came out. People were saying, well, what is poor behaviour? We haven't got a definition that's accepted across the whole organisation. And so because that question was kind of tactically wrong, I wasn't too bothered about the fact that I didn't give examples and stuff on that question, because what I wanted people to do is go, oh, that question's not right, and here's why it's wrong, and really sort of go off on one and do me a nice little rant where they could say what was wrong, how it could be better, what they'd seen, you know, really kind of take me on a journey into their considerations in that role, doing that thing. And because what I wanted to get to was a question that was so neutral that we couldn't influence, because even the question that was describe their behaviour, even that, we provided examples, and it was something like, for example, they were engaged, but what came out in some of the testing was that even by talking about behaviour, we're putting a limit on what sort of answer we want, and that actually the impact of that question, or the answers to that question, is bigger than just the behaviour. So what I really wanted was quite a neutral question that was open, that could be interpreted in, you know, a number of different ways. But you kind of you're going at the thing that you can never get there. So I was trying to get as close as possible, which I don't think I fully answered your question, because I think the thing that you want me to say is, if you were asking a similar sort of question, would you provide examples? I think I can imagine a situation where you would, if you've got, you know, like a fairly limited range of what sort of answer you're expecting. I think actually that would probably work. But hopefully that answers your question. Ah, phew. Cool. Oh yeah, another question. Would you say there's much difference between applying content design to a web page versus a document? Would it depend on the document was to be read online or printed? I don't think there's that much difference, but sometimes a document you don't really have to do anything, so it's harder to test. You're just like giving information over. So I think in that case you would lean more towards just those kind of clear language, plain English techniques where you're doing the bullet points, you know, the negative space, the subheadings, rather than, you wouldn't necessarily be able to test it, is my feeling on that one. But you definitely, anything that helps it be read, I think is worth spending that time doing. Does that answer your question? Cool. Any other questions? Also, please do say them out loud, in case I'm reading them out in a way that's not how you intoned it in your mind. Ask me anything. Hi, Mariam.
Hi, Christine. That was really helpful. Thank you so much. As someone who isn't a content designer and knows nothing about it, this was a really interesting introduction to it. I was just going to ask if you've got any kind of recommended reading, like a bit of an idiot's guide for those of us who need it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I tell you what we could do. I hope this isn't a cheat, but because we have so many lovely content designers on the call, if we could each drop our favourite reading material into the chat, and then we've crowdsourced an amazing list of resources. Or obviously come to my website, Mariam.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be cool actually. Then we can all copy it out. Davina, hiya.
Hi. I was going to ask a question about kind of, it was really obvious as you went through the examples of why all those iterations were needed and how that therefore resulted in where you eventually got. I was wondering, on projects where people don't understand content design or don't understand the value of those different iterations, and therefore don't understand the value of putting the time into it, how do you normally manage that, and how do I guess how do you get the message across?
Yeah. So yeah, we're still in that tricky place, aren't we, sometimes, where we're like, elbows, 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 I deserve to be here. My favorite tactic for those situations is I like to build a relationship one by one with the people that I'm working with, because so it's powerful when you advocate for yourself, but it's really powerful when someone else on your team does it. So your user researcher comes to you and says, I think we should test this question, or you mentioned something about testing this, well, you know, bit of content. Or if your designer is like, oh, hey, do you think this flow of information is the right way round? So that's normally my starting point. I don't usually go at it like, hey, let me tell you what I do. I normally go at it like, hey, tell me what you do. And then I sort of assume like they're pitching it to me sometimes. Trying not to be like, pitch me, bro. But more like, right, how do you work? It's sort of like a ways of working. How do you work? Right, you do the design. How do you do the design? Okay, you're a Figma person, great. Or you're a Post-it notes person, great. Okay, so how should we collaborate? Because obviously we'll, you know, when we're talking about the, I don't know, the information flow, would we do a Post-its thing together? Would I do a Figma? Should I give you the questions first? So then So that can be one way around it. Another way around it is sometimes to do like a quick and dirty, like I've done 2 options with the user researcher. We've asked 3 people, you know, it's by no means comprehensive, but here are, you know, as a team, let's decide how we should go forth. I don't know if you tried a couple of those. What's your normal way of going about it?
So my question is actually from like a different angle, because I'm a delivery manager.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I've seen this play out before, and like try to sort of understand the best way to get people to communicate beyond that. So yeah, both those examples are really helpful.
Yeah. If you have ever used liberating structures as a way of running meetings or getting buy-in, there are a set of techniques that you can use in meetings, and particularly for people working together, to ensure that everyone's voice is heard.
Yeah.
And that can be a really powerful way to bring people in. People aren't always able to do that, you know, but the mix of personalities and kind of, what am I telling you? That's literally you. So, but those can be useful ways rather than just, I need to be heard, but more like, how can we work together? There's this idea that I think about sometimes that's, I read about it once. It's something along the lines of, you're you, and then there's someone else and they're them, so you're 2, but then when you talk together, that makes 3, and the relationship between the 2 of you is the 3rd entity. And that is a really interesting way to look at, it's not me, it's not them, it's when we're together, this 3rd thing is happening, and it's like this 3rd thing that needs the help. I personally don't need the help, but it's just like the melding of those 2 things, and that's what the liberating structures really helps with.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that.
No probs. Jennifer, hi.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I am in the very almost privileged position where I get to work with a content designer, an interaction designer, several URs, and a whole raft of other people. So it's been really cool to focus in on that. I have lots of great conversations with my content designer because we both love words and linguistics degrees. So I have a bit of a 2-pronged question for you. Obviously, language changes constantly. It ebbs and it flows. So what do you do to make sure that you're kind of cognizant of those ebbs and flows? How do you keep up with the changes? Is there any like particular things that you like to follow or, you know, engage with, so that, you know, you're suddenly not using an inappropriate word or something that's right? And secondly, are there any words that you particularly love to use?
Yes. I'm just going to look on my Slack because I have the answer to your first question, which I would like to share with you. I'll just find it. One of the words that I really love is a word called crump, and it's when you walk in snow, and that's the noise it makes. Love that. Okay, there are lots of words that I like to use. My friend Rob Mills will often chat, and he'll often write down things that I've said. And it'll be things like wibbly wobbly and that sort of thing. There is a website and there's now a book. And I couldn't find it then when I was looking. I'm sure it's called, I wish I could remember. Is it called The Conscious Style Guide? Oh yeah. Oh, Karen, the writer of it, is in. Oh no, but you were having audio problems, weren't you? Okay. Well, Karen, amazingly, has written The Conscious Style Guide. Sorry, this is an Amazon link. Obviously, we'd find a more ethical seller. But Karen's written that and it's incredible. So, and I believe also runs a newsletter, which you can subscribe to. Isn't this a full circle moment? And the newsletter is brilliant, keeps you up to date with what's hot, what's not. Stop saying this, stop saying that. Interestingly, I did do a training course recently on inclusive language, and as part of that training course, I talked about how language changes, and that was really fun because I got to delve and do loads of research. But one of the things that I found out was that the word nice has been around for 700 years, and it started off a completely different meaning to what it is now. It's meant all sorts of things like tidy and, you know, all that kind of, I don't know, just a real journey. You don't always see how they get from one to the other. But I think you soon find stuff that doesn't work with a range of people reading it. Because there's also this other idea that people will use a word and they'll be like, well, it means this, it should mean this, it means this in the dictionary. And all of that, it sort of means nothing if actually it also means something else in a more modern usage. So the dictionary argument is dictionaries are behind. That's how they work. But people often have this idea that dictionaries are the words that should be used, not the words that are used. So yeah, we're all snobs, and it takes quite a long time to get rid of our snobbery around language. Work in progress. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Natalie, hello.
Hi, thank you so much for this, Christine. It's been lovely. And I've made tons of notes and I've got lots of things I'm going to steal. I was just going to say, carrying on from what you just said about like language and us kind of progressing with it, I recently finally read the 2nd edition Content Design Bible, if you like, Sarah Richards and co. And one of the things that was in there that really stuck to me actually as a English literature graduate, and I know that loads of content designers I've worked with come from that background, one of the things that they said in that book was that good content designers aren't wedded to grammar rules, that they were taught in primary school, and that language moves on and a good content designer moves on with it. But I do think that's a really hard thing for people to do sometimes. I think it's, you know, like things like when you say you and I, whereas actually in real life you just say me and you, and that kind of thing, but you're so wedded to it. So I find that kind of stuff really fascinating. I just wanted to share that little snippet from the book that I really liked.
Yeah, so true. And you catch yourself doing it, don't you? Just before this, I was looking at some bullet points and I was wondering whether to cap up the first letter, you know, blah, blah. And then I was like, oh, no one will care. And then I was like, oh, people might care. And then I was like, I don't care. And then I was like, oh, okay, I do care. That's why I'm mentioning it. Oh my God, I'm worried about LinkedIn. Christine did this. But yeah, it's really hard because we pride ourselves on that knowledge. But if people can understand it, and like you say, if you said me and you, we would all understand. Hey, thanks for coming, gang. Yeah, it's we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I like to think of content designers as like a series of head boys and girls, you know, real boffs at school. Just trying to do a really good job. Bless us. Hey, it's 13:01. I should probably hand back over to you, Jacob, and leave these lovely people alone.
I couldn't jump in. Like, why stop a good thing? But look, Christine, thank you so much. That was really excellent. And you really got us off to a great start. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I was going to sort of share a bit on next time, but what I'll do is I'll get something out on email to let you know who the next speaker is and when it is and all that good stuff. So yeah, thank you all so much. And thanks, Christine.
Thanks, gang. Thanks for having me. See you again.
Bye.